McGill business professor Karl Moore follows the aviation industry and is here with us. Welcome back. It's always good to see you.
My pleasure, Tom. Great to be here.
You travel around the world with your students. You have your Hot Cities tour, and we'll talk to you about that in just a few moments. But let's start with Boeing 737s. The chilling effect of the two crashes just a few months apart, the deaths of 300 people. What impact is this having as far as the airlines and travelers in Canada and the U.S.?
Well, in Canada, Air Canada and WestJet, the two biggest carriers, have MAX 8 and 9, and it's about 6-7% of their fleet. So it's had a considerable impact, particularly this time of year, Tom, when it's the winter break, spring break occurring. That'll be over, and April and May into early June is a quieter period for air travel in Canada and the U.S., so it'll be less of an impact, and hopefully Boeing will have sorted the problem by then. So it has had some impact in Canada and the U.S. There's a lot of MAX 8 and 9s in the fleets down here. I think the bigger issue is that there's kind of a bit of a questioning in the world by the FAA, and did they kind of wait too long? And the Canadians were the same day. So Marc Garneau, the Minister of Transport, announced that he had actually changed his mind overnight as they saw some satellite data saying that the two crashes looked, at least on the surface, very similar. But it has caused Boeing considerable problem. It's their future biggest product. It's one of their biggest sources of profitability and by far the largest part of their order book. So it really is creating some clouds in the future for Boeing, without a doubt.
So Boeing says they're trying to fix the problem. They say they're working on an upgrade to fix this. But even if they do that in the next few weeks, it's likely that the 737s are not going to get in the air very quickly.
Well, part of it is when they got to fix the problem, and then another issue is the training, because the idea is that some pilots, even here in the States, were trained by an iPad to go to the MAX 8 or 9 because they've flown 737. And part of the MAX 8 and 9 was saying that it's not that much different, that you don't need a lot of training, which is very expensive for the airlines. But it seems in retrospect that was not adequate, and particularly with this new problem, every pilot in the world that flies will want to make sure that they're safe. Job number one in the airline industry is safety. So that will take a while to get the training out there and get it to the pilots that need it.
Is it likely there's going to be a lot of scrutiny of Boeing, scrutiny of the FAA, whether this plane was certified and either this was overlooked or that they were unaware that this problem existed?
Well, it may have been rushed through, and why would they do that? Number one thing is safety, and this is pilots, I mean, they're on the plane, but airlines, this is the thing that's drilled into them, is it's safety above all.
Could this be good for Bombardier and Airbus? Could airlines look at them instead of a 737?
They could, except the A320 has years of backlog of orders already, and the C-Series is backlogged for a couple of years. And they're ramping up production down in here in the States in Alabama, but there's limits to how fast they can do that.
For Boeing, how much of a hit are they taking? Their stock took an immediate hit a couple of weeks ago, but long term, will this be a significant blow to the company?
It has the potential to be, and certainly from the CEO on down, this is the number one issue to solve this problem. Is it's such a big part of the backlog and their profitability, they've got to get this sorted, and their reputation for safety is central.
Prime Minister Trudeau has been caught up in a political scandal. Trudeau and his Liberal Party facing criticism that they tried to influence the federal prosecution of a giant construction and engineering firm that's based in Montreal. The company, SNC-Lavalin, has faced allegations that they tried to bribe the Libyan government to win billions of dollars in government contracts. Canada's former Attorney General says she was pressured by Trudeau to go easy on the firm, which employs 9,000 workers. She later resigned along with another member of Trudeau's cabinet. How divisive has this been for Canada?
Oh, it's a huge issue. And we're looking at election in the fall, and Trudeau may not be re-elected. It may be the Conservatives getting in power, and this seems to be the critical issue at the moment. I mean, there's been other issues, but this is something about credibility of the government. But it strikes me there's a narrow legal issue. I'm not a lawyer. There's a political issue, but the bigger issue is business. And I've had the last 4 CEOs of SNC come to class over the last 12, 15 years now. And I've talked to literally hundreds of people at SNC, current and former employees. Absolutely, I'm very convinced they cleaned up their act, that they were guilty of things. People have been arrested, rightly so. One of the former CEOs under house arrest right now in Montreal. People, they've changed the culture, and I've heard this from many, many people, from the lower levels up to the CEOs. They've changed the culture. So the idea is punish the people that need to be punished, but don't punish the current employees. Well, there's actually, interesting, more in Ontario than Quebec. about 9,000 in Canada, but a bit more Ontario than Quebec. But part of it is Quebec's history. You remember the 70s, Tom, that a lot of head offices moved from Montreal to Toronto. When I was a kid in the late 60s in elementary school, teachers said Montreal's bigger and more important, and that was in Toronto. That changed, where Toronto's clearly a bigger, more important city, Montreal number 2 in the country. And so in Quebec, and we had Alcan sold to Rio Tinto, we had Rona sold to some Americans down here. So something where there's a sensitivity in Quebec that you don't have in the rest of the country around losing head offices, those jobs. So we don't want to lose SNC because it creates a lot of great jobs, and it's nice to be the center of the world.
Do you think most people in Quebec would think that Trudeau did the right thing, trying to protect those jobs, trying to look out for that company?
Oh, absolutely. And the idea of bringing this new legislation under the Conservatives was to allow for plea of guilty, as you're allowed to do in the US and the UK and France and some other countries we compare ourselves with, that's kind of the point of the legislature, is that we've done wrong, we've changed, we've seen evidence of that, and then we take a penalty and move on. But here it could be a number of years where they can't bid on government projects. That's not only bad for that, but their competitors would go around the world going, their own government doesn't trust them, why should you?
This is a huge political issue right now. The Conservatives, just within the past couple of weeks, held a filibuster in Parliament trying to call for an investigation into this. This seems likely it could stick around right through till the federal election in October.
Well, the Conservatives will ensure it's an election issue because it's a wedge issue for them and may allow them to form the government again.
What about trade? The trade tensions between the U.S. and Canada last summer, there was finally the agreement, now the USMCA, which replaces NAFTA. How do Canadians feel about that?
Probably relieved. It was something where it could have gone much worse for Canada. Canada's been hurt by that, but relatively less than we thought it might be, given what the U.S. has done in the Trump administration with China and so on. But the administration would see Canada as its friendliest neighbor and something where culturally we're closer than would be to Mexico. And so something where I think mainly relief that it could have been worse. Wasn't great, but it wasn't really bad.
It hasn't been approved by either Congress or in Ottawa yet. Do you anticipate that they could have trouble winning approval in Ottawa?
I don't think so. I think it's something where let's just get it out of the way. And the U.S. economy is so important to Canada. And it's somewhat the other way around, but you just have such a much bigger economy, 10 times ours, that we just want to make sure that we can continue to trade with by far, our most important trade partner. One
of the sticking points was in Ontario and in Quebec. This opens the dairy market to U.S. farmers. And for many, that was a point that they really wanted to stick to their guns to protect farmers in Canada.
Well, it's a political issue because there's less farmers than there was a generation ago. And it's something where some of the dairy product companies in Canada would like a little bit more freedom. So it's a mixed story, but from a political viewpoint, they're important.
Every year, you take your students, your business students around the world to some of the hot cities. This is the 11th year you've done that. Where did you go this year?
Well, we went to Tokyo, Bangkok, and Hong Kong. But it was great being over in Tokyo for 4 days. McGill has had an MBA for 20 years there, have a lot of alumni. And Bangkok, very interesting because an emerging economy where everybody's an entrepreneur, it seems. And this is what senior executives told us, is that everybody tries to sell something, and if you don't have a job, just go sell shirts on the street. And we could see that the energy in life was really very different than Japan. And then Hong Kong there for a day and a half, but met with some very senior executives. And Hong Kong, you could feel the influence of Beijing kind of tightening a bit on Hong Kong, bringing it more into the Chinese family. Still two systems, but probably a bit less than 5 or 10 years ago, and clearly an evolution of the role of Hong Kong in the world.